Kamau, how are you doing?
I'm in it, man.
You in it?
I'm deep in it.
You're deep in it.
I'm
Uh,
through the looking glass.
through looking. I let's just get right into it. So my name is Brandon Jones. I am a contributor to LRM Online. And I wanted to talk to you because I saw the trailer for We Need to Talk About Cosby. And then some folks were fortunate enough to give me a screener for it. And the funny thing about it is as people were handed iPads in the beginning, they watched clips and they had that. That
Mm-hmm.
was me as I was watching
Mm,
this documentary. My
mm.
wife was watching with me.
Oh, good.
It was, it was
Yeah,
impactful. So you've
yeah.
done a thing. Um,
Yeah, that's. I think that's you've done a thing. That's.
you did a
I
thing.
respect the nuance of that. Seriously, the unpacking that you've done a thing. Yes, I
Hey,
have done a
hey,
thing.
I word good. I try.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Question for you about this though. So you know the idea of what you said, you said, we need to have a conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you go from having like a kitchen table conversation or a conversation with friends or texting with your friends to like, no, we're gonna do this? And so you've come and you've directed this massive 4-part documentary about this. How do you get from that stage in the beginning to where you are now?
I mean, I think you can text your friend and be like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And they go, "I don't know," and then you, "Ha ha, lol, whatever." And then you can call your friend and be like, "Hey, can we talk?" And your friend goes, "Oh, okay." Like you can let your friend know, "I want to have a bigger conversation about something," and your friend respects that and goes. And sometimes it's like, "Let's get on. I need time to talk to you on the phone. Make sure that the kids are asleep, whatever it is, or let's go out to dinner and really talk and be really have a separate experience, or let's come to my house." And so that's the way I approach this. If you reach out to somebody and go, "Hey, can we talk about this, can we talk about Bill Cosby in these ways?" And you sort of let them know that these are the parameters I want to discuss it still becomes a conversation, if not between friends. I wasn't friends with everybody, but a conversation with people who actually want to have a really good conversation.
Okay.
So it's less of me interviewing you. I mean, there are some times where it's like, what year did this happen? But most of it is like, how did you feel about that?
Right.
What did you think? What was the first time you what was the first time Bill Cosby came into your life? Describe those experiences? That it's like you have to, and that's what the doc is like, we wanted to create a space for a conversation that we felt like wasn't really happening like that. That maybe most of it is happening online between people who never will never meet each other and are pretending to be people other than who they are, or it's
Mm,
happening with your friends, but you're only having one aspect of it because that's the only aspect you feel like you can talk about it with your friend. So this is
sure.
like the thing about this doc that I wanted to do is like, and there's two documentaries that are really like like sort of like the touchstones of this doc. One is O.J. Simpson Made in America by Ezra Edelman, because it was
Mm,
like, who thought they wanted a 7.5 hour OJ doc before that came out?
right.
Like that wasn't like, that's not something you're like, ooh, 7.5 hour OJ doc, I can't wait. But you press play on it, and within a few minutes, you're like,
Just
oh, okay,
immersed.
all right. Then you're like, why isn't it 14 hours? And then the same with like, then the other doc is Surviving R. Kelly, which in some ways I didn't want to watch at all, but felt like it was my duty. And it was like me and my friend Kevin Avery talk about black homework. It was black people homework. You have
Right.
to watch this if you want to be in the conversation and part of the culture. So, so those two documentaries I felt like were like talking about situations that in some ways are similar to Bill Cosby, but in many ways completely different, because neither one of those black men were heroes in the way that Bill Cosby was a hero. And they also, neither one of those black men, I mean, maybe OJ a little bit, but they weren't like, well, no, they weren't creating content for kids that those kids would then take into their heart and then grow up and feel like, the guy I knew as a kid, it's hard to divorce from the person I'm finding out he is as an adult.
Right. And yeah, to be quite honest, that was part of what made this so hard to watch. Is you talked about being a Cosby kid, and I'm in that same era of somebody that grew up with him and inculcated a lot of the things that he said and talked about and watched on the show. And so this is a reckoning because this is the person that he's
Mm-hmm.
always been. This isn't. So you
Mm-hmm.
talked about OJ, like that was a thing that he did or didn't do, right? Like depending on
Mm-hmm.
how you feel about it. This is who Cosby has
Yes.
always been.
Yeah.
That's what makes
Yeah.
it so frightening to me.
Yeah. No, and that's what it was important. Even for me, like a lot of this is about what I learned through the making of this documentary. I think that like people who, even if you believe the women and at some point you decided you believed the women or accepted that these things were true, maybe you didn't read every article all the way to the end. Maybe you just read some headlines. Maybe you would see it on the news and be like, ugh, and turn it off because who wants to take that information in? So in that, you maybe have reduced it to like, this is a horrible situation where he raped and sexually assaulted these women. But in your mind, maybe it's like 61 night stands and it all took place in the late 90s to the early 2000s. Because you're just like, that's when I kind of started hearing about it. So that's probably when it took place.
Right.
But then when you sit down, and this is where I found out that like the first allegations go all the way back to the very close to the early days of his career.
Right.
So this is not about like a guy who went through a bad period or a guy who did it for a finite period of time. These allegations, and it was important for us to show, look through the whole strain, and that's where the timeline comes in to go. We showed you this one woman, Victoria Valentino, but that's not even all from that period, and that story is horrible. And
Right.
so to really go, can you accept the fact that these women, these allegations go all the way back to the early stage of his career, and these women had gained nothing from telling this story because American society says if you're a woman who's been sexually assaulted and raped, the cops won't believe you. They will blame you. Your community might not believe you, or they might believe you but think it was your fault. There's not a lot of positives from coming out as a survivor of sexual assault and rape.
Right. One of the things you just talked about with regard to that timeline made something pop in my head about a support structure. And one of the guests you had on there talked about the fact that other people knew. And so given that you found out that this timeline went so far back, how did you feel understanding that basically there was no way that he could have done this without so many people around him knowing about this?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that like this is where we get into the conversation about how show business works, and specifically, especially the era that he came into show business. And you know, some of the things we do without even really VO, you just show clips of movies, and you're like, oh my god, like Sean Connery physically takes a woman, spins her around, says "man talk," slaps her on the ass, and pushes her away. And he apparently hit her so hard on the butt that he hurt his arm. He rubs his arm after she walks away, and you're like, that's the hero of the movie.
Right.
You know, so like the idea being that like that's the guy we're rooting for. And so then you go, this, and Roland Martin is in here talking about the 60s was a time where men could have married men, rich, successful married men in Hollywood could have several affairs. And it was just sort of like, boys will be boys. It was no big deal. And so I think a lot of this, I go, you know, when they set up Hollywood, they didn't go, before we get started on making movies and television, where do we put the human resources department? Like, that's not what the concern was. It was about like, we make dreams and we have a good time while we're making dreams. And so I think there is a tendency in Hollywood to say we deserve to have a good time and live in ways that we would not live if we were accountants at a small business in Davenport, Iowa, you know.
Wow. Okay.
That we have earned the right to, these are the spoils of making dreams. And I think then a lot of what Cosby did gets filed under infidelity, especially in the early days. But you know, and so and also a lot of how show business works is that if you're what they call a below the line employee, somebody whose job is like, just make sure this plug doesn't get unplugged, your part of your job is to look the other way. It is none of your business. Don't worry about it. And so if you see something, there's no HR department that you know of, so who do you tell? But also, you've been told this is not what you're supposed to tell. So maybe things are happening that you're actively not looking at, so you can't even see what's really happening.
Yeah. It's a frightening thought to be in that position and feel like just for fear out of losing your job, you just won't say anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
I
think that is still, I don't think that's gone. I don't think we've lost that. I don't think that's completely out of the industry. I think that a lot of times in the same way that like some people think 2020 actually was a racial reckoning, some people think Me Too solved everything. And I think the Tarana Burke would tell you that that's an ongoing process. It is not something that it's not settled law, as they say. As we know in this country, nothing is settled law. I
mean, I feel like those are the same people in 2008 that said racism is gone. Right.
Exactly, but there's a way in which America weaponizes good things for evil. Like, you know, so like so the winning of a black president becomes like no more racism. Wait, that's not how this
works.
And you know, even Cosby in that way is like, one black guy with a hit show on television means that black people have achieved something, when really it's about like one guy with a hit show on television.
Yeah. prior to this coming out at Sundance, you've had the opportunity to show this to friends and family, and I feel like those are the people who uh, may have the strongest reactions to this. What was their reaction like?
It's funny. That really was like like when we first had the early cuts, the earliest versions of this. My VO was not in it, and there was a sense that like I would show it to my wife, and she was like, "Okay, I see where you're going for, but it's not really all hanging together." So like my wife Melissa was like, and I was like, "Ta-da!" And so really, it was a lot of those conversations with friends and family. One of my good friends. Actually, Kate Schatz, who I'm co-authoring a book with about an anti-racist workbook called "Do the Work." She saw it and she was like, "Yeah." She was really like, "I feel like it needs more you in it." And I was like,
Mm,
you sort of want to be like, but it's not about me. It's about these other people. And then at some point, it got to Showtime and they're like, "It needs more you in it." And I was like, "Well, I've heard this message from so many people now. Maybe it's me and not them who needs to listen." So
sure.
that's the process of really friends and family, is like showing it to people and getting some like, I know what you're capable of. I know what you told me this is. This is not that yet. And so I
Okay.
remember when finally at one point we started to lay my VO in, and with like one of the few times we actually all got to be in the room, like uh the couple of producers and the editor were in LA, and me and my wife had gone to LA to work on this. This is in the middle of COVID. During that period of time, we feel like, I think it's safe. Remember the good old days?
Yeah.
We went to LA and she watched it in the room, and it was the first time she was like, "That's it." And that was with my VO with a more personal opening. It didn't used to have a personal opening.
Yes.
And it was like, there it is. And I felt like, okay, and at that point we were working over a year. So it took that long for my wife to be like, now you're doing the thing that you told me you were doing.
Sure. And I got to say that like that opening, it sells it because the way that you say, I'm a child of Cosby, you say it as a joke, but I immediately was like, yeah, like I
Mm-hmm.
remember growing
Mm-hmm.
up in that era, like the Jello pudding pops and
Yeah.
like all the commercials and fat, like, yeah, that's
Yeah,
me.
yeah. The great thing about being a comedian is I can handle this material in a way that like other documentary filmmakers can't. They
Right.
don't have access to that kind of tone, and they have access to different tones that make their things. I think it's all good, but to me, it felt like when I sort of embraced the fact that I can say my name is W. Kamau Bell, I'm a stand-up comedian. You know that therefore this information is going to come. There may be parts of this that come from a comedian's idea of how this
Sure.
works.
As a comedian, as somebody who it seemed like it was very personal, right? Like
Oh,
some
sure.
of what Cosby does was at the nucleus of who you are as a comedian and as a person. There was a part where Jerry Seinfeld was like, "Yeah, I can still watch it. I can separate it." How do you feel about that?
I mean, me and the people who worked on this project have spent like I was gonna say 2 years. It's been way more than 2 years because the pandemic's been 2 years. It's been like over like 3 years. Yeah,
Time isn't a
time.
thing anymore. Don't worry
We
about it.
have really understood. If nothing has taught us that time is an illusion, it's a global pandemic. That we created time. Time doesn't care about time, our conception of time. Uh, we've been looking at this show for over 3 years, and even from the very early days, when we knew what we were doing, we were going to talk about the rapes and the assaults that we believe he did, and we're also going to talk about his career and the good things that he did. I would hear there would be regular conversations like, I was listening to one of his albums this morning, and I just found like trying to find a good clip for the doc, and I started laughing and I
Laughing,
started
yeah,
enjoying it. Or I was going through clips of the Cosby Show, and there's still good. That stuff is still funny. It's still good. And so I've been wrestling with that for years, but really this doc really put me in a direct wrestling match with it. When we did the section of the doc that's about the Cosby Show, we are lovingly, and I am lovingly praising that show and what I thought was good about that show. There is no sort of like equivocation on it. However, I'm also admitting here's what was going on while the show was going on.
right.
So for me, like, I can't sit here and tell you I'm never going to watch a Bill Cosby clip again and laugh, but I can tell you that I'm not going to let that laugh make me forget about what I know and believe to be true about him. I would imagine there might come a point that I will show one of my three daughters, the clip from the Cosby Show, "The Nighttime is the Right Time," the Ray Charles lip sync scene, because
Yeah,
that is like such a
it's
quintessential
classic.
part of Black culture. But I also talked to her about, in an age appropriate way, who this man was off camera, and why we have to be careful and not think that just because somebody does a good thing that they're a good person. Because I also wanted to be clear to my daughter, if to all my daughters, if someone ever rapes or sexually assaults you, there is one man you can come to who will have your back and who will believe you.
Right, right. Well, I cannot wait until this documentary comes out because I would desperately like to have this conversation with my friends and my family, like especially my parents who I grew up watching the Cosby Show with, and that's gonna be a hell of a conversation.
Well,
But
that's the most important part of this. We need to talk about Cosby conversations, the conversations that come out of this, not the conversation we have in it.
yeah, absolutely. And so I know this is going to premiere at Sundance before it comes out on VOD, and it's going to be coming. You said Showtime as well, right?
Yeah, it's gonna be. Yeah, it'll be at Sundance on January 22nd, and then it'll be on Showtime on January 30th and VOD after it drops on Showtime on January 30th.
That's fantastic.
Thank
So,
you.
Mr. Bell, Kamau, thank you so much.
Yeah, no, we've had this kind of conversation, so we like keep it formal.
I'm giving you flowers like that. That is a
you.
respect for the thing that you have done, because what I really respect for you with you about this is no easy task, right? The thing that you did, there are some people on the internet right now, like, how could you do this? Why would you do this? So
they're on my Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for sitting with me. And again, thank you for making this documentary. I hope it does well.
Thank you for watching. Tell your wife I said thank you too.
Will do.